Hello, and welcome to today's broadcast on key readiness strategies for Microsoft 365 Copilot, brought to you by Insight and Microsoft. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and our speakers will answer throughout the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn over this presentation to our speakers, Anna and Joe. The floor is yours.
Oh, excellent. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Anna Donnelly. I am a services product manager here at Insight, specializing in modern work, and these days that is all things Copilot. And I am here with Joe. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, so good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're from. Joe Flynn, Director of our Modern Workplace Area of Expertise, responsible here at Insight for all the technologies tied to modern work, which many times is where end users tend to be focused on. Nice to virtually meet everybody via the webinar. So let's dive in. So in this webinar, we're going to touch on a few things. Copilot, what is it? Ultimately, what it's not. The different aspects of what we hear the term Copilot is. The connection between Microsoft 365 best practices and Copilot readiness. What do we have to actually do to prepare for Copilot? And then ultimately, how are we, from an Insight perspective, helping our clients get prepared to purchase or look to implement, adopt, use Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, one thing Anna and I always like to start on is what are the differences between all these ChatGPT AI models that are out there today. And so I'm going to start from the left and move to the right. And everyone's aware we're coming up, actually it's probably a little over 13 months maybe now, that ChatGPT was released last year, and it just skyrocketed with adoption. Probably better than the tools of like your kids' TikToks and everything else. The adoption went absolutely berserk. But the problem with ChatGPT is it learns based on how you use it, how our users use it. So whatever you type in, personal data or not, gets fed into that training model, which could be presented to someone else who uses it. Now, from a company standpoint, many companies blocked it. Many companies are putting policies not to use the public version of ChatGPT out there. There's great use cases for it, no doubt. But again, there's security issues, especially for your corporation. More importantly, even as an end user, you don't want to type in any of your personal information. This is when, as of August of this year, Microsoft released, formerly known as Bing Chat Enterprise. They now call it Copilot, just plain Copilot, as of 2 weeks ago with Microsoft Ignite. That is basically your ChatGPT that, when I mentioned, goes out to the web and captures all of the information, but it's in a secure manner. So what you type in stays in that session and does not go out to the large language model on the web and using your data to train it. So you have to have an authenticated user within your environment to leverage the Bing Chat for Enterprise. But the key thing there is it does not use your corporate data. It's still going out to the web like ChatGPT on the left. It's just keeping your information secure within your environment. And when that session is done, that information is then deleted upon the exit of that session. So again, two left sides are 100% using all web-based AI, nothing within your environment. Now, on the right side, as we shift, is now when we start getting to specifically into your environment. If we look at the Azure OpenAI services, that is meant to be more of a custom model that you want to deploy, leveraging your corporate data. And it's meant for more custom use cases within your environment. So for example, if you have a use, in our case, I'll use Insight. We have a use case where we work with a lot of customers. We generate a lot of statements of works and those type of things. So we're leveraging OpenAI to have us understand how do we get more efficient? How do we make it easier, quicker, faster to write ourselves, our statement of works for customers, so we don't have to spend so much time doing it. Obviously, we probably do 10 to 15,000 of these a year. So if we can find ways to improve and save time, it's well worth it. So we're feeding OpenAI into all of our past statements of works that we've done for the past few years. And it's 70 to 80,000 worth of documents. And it's going to learn, it's going to index, it's going to understand the technologies, why we write the technologies, how we write it, what risks are involved. So it's being trained for a very specific use case, and our purpose for an Insight specific use case. Now, if we shift to Microsoft 365, that is everything tied to the Microsoft Productivity Suite. And we'd say the Productivity Suite, we're talking about things like Word, Excel, Outlook, Teams, Loop, OneNote, those type of tools. That is leveraging your corporate data that is in the Microsoft Office 365 tenant space, or what they call the Microsoft Graph. So anything you have within like your SharePoint, your OneDrive, kind of think through these, I say it so much, SharePoint, OneDrive, Outlook, Teams, all of those tools within the Office 365 stack, that data is stored in what they call the Microsoft Graph. That's the data that's specifically used for Copilot. That data is not used for ChatGPT. That data can't be used in Bing for Chat for Enterprise. That data specifically can't be used for Azure OpenAI unless the company is specifically going that direction. But Microsoft 365, the moment you turn it on, it's going to index everything you have in your Microsoft Cloud. It's going to give you a better understanding of your data. So now when users use the productivity apps of Word, Excel, Outlook, Teams, they can now use the AI built into those apps to reach out and use your data to now generate responses and outcomes of ultimately what they're asking for. I think what we like to talk, and Anna likes to actually talk through this on the right side, is think about Azure OpenAI if you're bringing in a custom chef into a party, right? You can give the chef all of the menu items you kind of want. Maybe you want custom ingredients to it. Maybe you want to be gluten-free. Maybe people have peanut allergies, but they can ultimately customize to get to the outcome of creating the food for your party that you're hosting. Microsoft 365 would be, hey, I'm going to host a party, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everyone a Chinese menu to order Chinese food that they can order to bring into the party. So that's key things to understand the main differences there. And also, if I stick to the right of 365 Copilot, always think through the use cases of what do I use these applications for? What do I use Word for? What do I use PowerPoint, Outlook, Teams? They're all very specific use cases: generating documents, generating presentations, having a meeting, generating emails. That is what the Copilot 365 Copilot is going to give you. It's going to give you the efficiency and speed to do those things faster. It's not going to create anything custom on that side. Now, I'm not going to go through, you may look at this slide and be like, there's a lot of information here, and there absolutely is. But if you look at this slide, what we want to try to show you is Copilot is being used everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And if I understand to the left, I already talked about Copilot for Bing Chat Enterprise. Windows 11 has Copilot coming out in its latest versions. I just talked about Microsoft 365 Copilot, which we're going to dig into a little more. And then we're continuing all the way down to the right, where now there's going to be Copilot for security, which allow you to do things in Teams, Defender in the Microsoft Cloud. There's Dynamics Copilot for your sales CRM type of situations. But then on the very right is something brand new that was announced 2 weeks ago. It's Copilot Studio. So Copilot Studio is going to allow your end users. So once you're licensed for Copilot, you'll be licensed for Copilot Studio. You'll allow your end users to extend what Microsoft 365 Copilot can do for them. So you've heard Microsoft for years talk about low code, no code. If you think of Power Automate, Power Apps, they had Power Virtual Agent. Now they're taking the capabilities of all those tools and wrapping into that same low code, no code for end users to extend Copilot for Microsoft 365. So if a user wants to type in specific words or a specific prompt into Microsoft 365 and they want it to go kick off other things that they may want to do, maybe go capture information from a Power BI, maybe go search folders in a specific SharePoint site or OneDrive, they can extend the capabilities of what Copilot can do with automation and additional low-code, no-code capabilities built into it. So literally everything. Now, when we look at this slide, this is essentially what happens underneath the hood, the curtains of how Microsoft 365 actually works. So let's stick, I'm going to break this slide actually into half at first. If you take that big multicolored symbol in the middle, everything to the left of it is your environment, okay? The Microsoft 365 graph on the bottom with all your data, the top right with the Microsoft 365 apps, so all those applications your users are using, that is your environment. Everything to the right of that big icon is the large language model that's hosted by Microsoft. So you are essentially a consumer of the large language model. Your data is not used to train the model. Your data is not used to feed it, to teach it additional things going forward. That model is static. That model is basically being used to create that natural language response back to the user within those productivity apps. So I'll just walk you through a quick flow. Let's say I'm in a Microsoft Word at the top left here, and I wanted to generate help me generate a document, maybe based on other documents, based on files from a SharePoint site. What it's going to do then, it's going to go to the bottom left, and it's going to search all that information based on the prompt that I entered. Maybe what documents, what content I want, how I want the content. It's going to search, and it's going to use a semantic index to kind of go through all of that data. And Anna's going to talk about that in a second. Once it captures all that data from the Microsoft Graph, it's going to send it over to the large language model, which is then going to go through it and help generate that response of creating the document. If I'm in Word, if I'm in PowerPoint, creating the PowerPoint with graphics. If I'm in Teams, creating summaries, creating task lists. So it's levered. That engine on the right is being used to take your data and generate the responses that it actually needs. Now, one other thing to look in here, you'll see these two white boxes on the bottom. So one is connectors and one is plugins. Plugins is a means of Teams. This is Teams message extensions that you can extend Copilot to go search other apps. So for instance, ServiceNow has a Teams message extension plugin. There's plenty of apps out there. But in turn, you can connect it to M365 Copilot to now go look into those apps based on natural language questions and responses. The connectors on the bottom, when we talk about that semantic index and the Microsoft search, that allows you to pull data in from other locations. So for instance, we had a customer that was leveraging Box or Dropbox. And they wanted to leverage that data into Copilot. They have the option of either doing connectors, so connecting that to the Microsoft Graph, so it's indexing that data, or they can simply migrate the data into OneDrive and have the whole ecosystem approach of what Copilot and the Microsoft tools provide. Because potentially the good thing about connectors is it allows you to extend. The bad thing is there could be additional cost for you. If I look at index items in the connectors, Microsoft gives you 500 indexed items for every licensed user, which means you could pull in 500 items externally for every licensed user. Once you exceed your allowed count, then it's $1,000 per month for 1 million indexed items. So $12,000 per year. So for this specific customer, just to walk you through the scenario, they had to think through, how much data do I have in Box? How much is that data growing per month? Am I exceeding the amount of information that connector is going to allow me to do? And once I do, what's the cost of me keeping that data being pulled in to a Copilot or to the search side of the Microsoft world? Because then it came down to it after they did the calculations, it's easier and cheaper for me long-term to migrate this data into OneDrive. So it just automatically gets consumed into Copilot, all the security features, all the productivity apps, all the entire ecosystem is what we like to call it. Anna?
So if you want to hang out there for just a second, because there's a question in the chat and I want to just answer it a little bit. So the question is Copilot would pull data and information from any application that we have tied to Azure AD. So the connector is what you're going to use. Microsoft Graph connectors are what you're going to use to connect third-party sources, right? So outside of what is in Microsoft 365, which is there by default. And that is what Joe is talking about. Could potentially have some cost implications. The other thing to note is that everything that is inside of the model here is part of the Microsoft 365 Trust Boundary, which means that your permissions will follow you throughout everything that is here. So if I don't have access to a document or a SharePoint site, I'm not going to be able to access that data as part of the model here, right? Or as part of my interaction with Copilot. The same is true if for anything that you have connected to your environment. So if you have single sign-on, that's what it's not necessarily what's connected to your Azure AD as much as it is what you have connected to single sign-on. It will carry those permissions through. So as long as you are looking at the data specifically around, what you're bringing in, you can get pretty granular on what you want to bring in. There are third-party connectors that have been created specifically for this purpose, default out of the box. Some of them cost a little bit of extra money, or you can create custom connectors as well. So just a couple of considerations there. for connecting third-party data. And the other thing really quickly is that everything that is happening in Microsoft 365 Copilot, the responses that it's providing, everything that you see there is really made possible because of the semantic index, right? It is not processing data in the same way that it does in GPT. Remember what Joe said, everything on the right, the large language model is only processing for natural language. It's the semantic index that makes everything possible. And it's really a new way of looking at search in your environment. And now if you want to hit the next slide, there we go. It's really a new way of looking at search in your environment, or of organizing content in your environment. And I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but we'll go through it because it's a really good example of how this works. So, you know, on the left, you would go to search. So whether it's in SharePoint or whether if you're using Bing search within your organization, it will take the keyword search, right? And it might be able to, if you make some kind of a typo or if it can't find something, it could potentially give you an alternative. So in this case, this person put the search term in there, Project Melbourne Showroom, right, which is nothing. That is a typo. The assumption that was made was that it was Project Melbourne Showroom, and then it just gives a bunch of results based on, you know, what is in their environment. And it might be the, you know, top 10 results or the latest things that have been created. Once we move over to the semantic index, same keyword, right? So they still misspelled it here, but now it's showing results for Project Melbourne Ship Room. Semantic index knows, based on the content and the data in your environment, that ship room is a thing, right? So it says you got a lot of content on it. It's not just, you know, correcting a typo. It's actually saying this is probably what you're looking for. And then from there, it's going to bring you relevant content that is not just, you know, keyword search. Here it is, right? It's giving you a definition from a document. It's saying here you interacted with this person about this document that was about Project Melbourne Ship Room. It gives you frequently asked questions. And the way that I like to describe the semantic index is that, you know, if I were to ask you, if I were to do a keyword search about elephants, it would give me, you know, a bunch of information about, or a bunch of content that's been created about elephants. Whereas now the semantic index knows that, you know, elephants are gray, that they can be found in various areas of the world, that, you know, they like peanuts, whatever it is that about elephants that we might know. It actually knows the things that are tied to the subject that you are looking at, right? So it's not just, you know, giving you a bunch of results based on the word that you've searched on. And that, again, is really what is making Copilot possible. It's not the what people are learning or what the model is learning as much as it is the semantic index that is providing context to the response that's been provided. The reason for that, if you think about this in Microsoft 365, every one of us has access to different data, right? So it's not going to be learning anything. How does it know from person to person? We have access to such a different set of content, right? So that's where the semantic index comes into play, and that is really what's happening in the background. So the next question as we talk about what happens with Copilot inevitably in the conversations that I have is, you know, how do I get access to it, right? And that is an interesting answer. So November 1st is when they released Copilot, and there could be some of you on the call today who have access to it. There could be others who are potentially, you know, looking at adding it to an enterprise agreement, and then still others who don't have access to the licensing. So the general availability date for enterprise customers, so if you have an enterprise agreement and you have Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, you would have access to that, right? So that's the first piece. Do you have an enterprise agreement? Do you have Microsoft 365 licensing that's been deployed? The next one is that you have to have 50% monthly active usage across apps. So that means that, 50% of your users are using OneDrive, uploading to SharePoint, all of the productivity apps, Word, Teams, Excel, Exchange, right? So anything that's in email. So that's 50% monthly active usage. And then the minimum is 300 seats. No question, no substitutes, no exceptions. 300 seats minimum at $30 per user per month. And right now, Microsoft is not offering any discounts. If you do have a discount level that is tied to your enterprise agreement, it does not apply to Copilot, specifically to Microsoft 365 Copilot. It could look a little bit different for some of the other Copilots that Joe showed earlier, but no discounts there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what to do to prepare. So everything that is related to Copilot readiness can kind of fit into the categories that we're looking at here, right? The organizational readiness, you have the right governance policies. Is your data estate ready? Are you ready from a security, privacy, compliance standpoint? What are your specific concerns there? Do you have the right pieces in place to enable people to adopt this? What are you going to do with those 300 licenses when you get them, right? How are you going to roll those out? Select the right people, train them appropriately, and then eventually potentially roll it out to a larger audience. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I'm going to start with the data estate because that probably is the one that concerns most people, right? So first of all is, what sources should be processed by the semantic index? Because yes, you can use Microsoft 365 Copilot to summarize content for you, right? So summarize this meeting, give me a summary of this 40-page, requirements document, something like that. You can ask it to write emails for you. But the real value comes in when it is able to look at the data in your environment and then provide some kind of a response based on that, right? So write me an email that talks about the latest thing that we're selling, right? So it'll draw from your environment. So thinking about what sources should be processed, where you're going to get the most value out of that is important, and I am going to talk about use cases in a minute. What content should be migrated to Microsoft 365? So we're talking to a lot of clients who, have quite a bit of technical debt, and we will talk about that in a minute. So folks that have been running on, file servers or file shares for a very long time. Perhaps they're using multiple different sources for their cloud storage, right? So maybe they have a box solution and they're also using OneDrive and then file shares, something like that. In a lot of cases, it's going to make more sense to migrate content into Microsoft 365 and into SharePoint than it is to connect it using one of those graph connectors, because like Joe said, there's additional costs that could be associated with that. What concerns around permissions, privacy, compliance do you have? So this is one that comes up really frequently. What is this going to surface that we're not aware that people have access to? The thing that I love that Joe says all the time is that, you do a search, how many of us ever go past the first page, right? So how many of us are looking at the search results and going past the first page? Copilot doesn't care what the search results are, right? It's going to just kind of bring up whatever the most relevant response is because of that, nice semantic index. So there's always a concern that it's going to expose contents that folks perhaps didn't know that they had access to. Again, all your permissions are going to carry over, but just because you have permission to something doesn't mean that you should, right? Because we perhaps are doing things like using sharing links to the whole organization, and we didn't realize that now that becomes part of the entire response from Copilot. So those sorts of things exist. The really, really good news is we've been testing this for quite a bit. It's been about 6 to 8 weeks, something like that, in our environment now. And there are a lot of things that Microsoft has done a really good job of cutting things off kind of right at the beginning, right? So if you're asking a question about a salary, if you're asking a question about PII, if you're asking a question about things that you could consider to be a concern from a privacy standpoint that might be blocked as part of some other security solution, those types of things, it's not even going to let you ask the question, right? But that doesn't mean that you don't have some confidential project or some legal department that needs to be separated from the rest of your organization. That doesn't mean that those things don't exist. So taking into consideration what those look like and being practical about it. It's really important to think practically about, do I really need to look at every single person's permissions? Or do I just need to see what is exactly going to create the most risk? That is exactly what Zero Trust is all about, entitlement management. Is that a list, that's on your list of priorities today? Because that is going to take care of a majority of security concerns. And guess what? It's also going to take care of security concerns that extend far beyond just AI and copilots and everything else. That's risk in your organization. If you're not having conversations about Zero Trust, you absolutely should be. That is the standard to which everybody should be managing these days. If you've got questions about it, of course, that is absolutely something that we can have a conversation about. And then lastly, does your data storage approach need to be evaluated? Just because everything is in a file share right now doesn't mean that it all needs to be migrated into Microsoft 365, right? Maybe you could move a majority of that into some kind of an archive solution, some low-cost data storage. And, maybe only a tenth of that is actually relevant. If you think about, what everybody has in their environment, how many of us, really need that spreadsheet from 1999? The answer is probably not many of us, right? So evaluating exactly what you need to migrate into your environment, and then also planning for growth. If you do have a large SharePoint deployment right now, and you're going to add even more data, more content there, perhaps that's something that you also need to plan for. So again, preparing your data state, a big piece of this, but there's a lot that we can do from a practical standpoint that doesn't have to be really complicated as far as how we're approaching it. Define and prioritize use cases. That is a pretty big one, right? Don't just leave it up to your end users to figure out how Copilot's going to add value. This is another thing that I say a lot. I think we have a tendency to all think that people care about things in the same way that we do. On my team and here at Insight, we are all technologists. We're technology, all tech, all the time, right? So a lot of us are really into this stuff. It's super interesting. But you go down to the person that's running the warehouse, or the person who is in finance or HR. These things are not on their mind, right? They're kind of like, oh yeah, this is whatever, this is cool. It's a new toy that's been given to me. Maybe I'll use it, maybe I won't. That $30 per user per month for 300 licenses is $100,000. That is the initial investment. That's a lot of money to just leave up to folks to decide whether or not they're going to use it, right? You want to make sure that you are getting the most value out of Microsoft 365 Copilot as you possibly can, because it can add quite a bit of productivity and efficiency to folks' days. So understanding what personas exist, what are their content creation needs, that one is pretty important, because that's really between summarization and content creation, those are the pieces that are working really well today for Copilot. Who are the best candidates? Talking to the business, if you are in IT, talking to the business and partnering with the business is going to be one of the most important things that you can do to drive return on investment. Get them involved, understand what it is that they're doing, and then give them a reason to use this. Define what advanced use cases exist. Joe showed you the big, chart about all the Copilots. Copilot Studio is something that's new that is going to extend the capabilities of Microsoft 365 Copilot to get into more pointed solutions. So there is a lot of value to be found in advanced use cases that certainly is going to drive productivity and efficiencies in your environment. I absolutely would recommend, defining what those things might be, and then determine how connectors, plugins are going to accelerate return on investment. Again, is it really important that people are able to access your data in ServiceNow? Or, where do you want to focus your effort? Do you really want to connect to a file share, or, let's look at where the greatest value is going to be found. What you're looking at are what Microsoft says are the top use cases for generative AI. Everything that's in gray is what Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, will do out of the box. So language translation, accelerated automation, creative writing, content design, all of these things can be accomplished with Microsoft 365 Copilot in some way. But let's talk about what it does today, right? So understand that this is a product that is in its infancy. There are a lot of early adopters who are kind of finding these things out. What you're looking at are current product use cases. And the thing that I am going to point out is that across most of these, summarization is a pretty big one, right? Catch me up on a meeting, summarize a long document, right? That for somebody who's working on contracts, that could be a huge, benefit to them. So think about the folks who are going to get the most value from the product use cases that you see here, because it's not necessarily everyone. I would say the places where we have seen the most excitement and the most value being driven are definitely, folks like HR organizations who are, writing offer letters, things like that are relatively standard and repeatable. Those folks absolutely are benefiting from this. Again, contracts, big deal. Folks in legal could be assisted by this. And then on the other side of that, if they are managing projects, if you have a project manager, or even if you're in sales, being able to summarize notes, create notes automatically, get action items out of a meeting really is extremely helpful, especially when you consider that you can have a project manager who's more engaged in the meeting than they are in taking notes. The same thing for sales folks as well. So current product use cases, something just to consider as you're making your plans for Microsoft 365 Copilot, and kind of setting expectations about what it can do today. And to that end, start bringing AI competency to your end users now. You don't necessarily have to wait for Microsoft 365 Copilot. Joe talked about Bing Chat Enterprise, or plain old Copilot. They changed the name of this 2 weeks ago to just Copilot. So, but Bing Chat Enterprise, again, that's that enterprise version of Bing Chat, or just regular old ChatGPT that doesn't consume your content, that's got commercial data protection built into it. That's a really good place to begin to help bring AI competency to your users, because again, we're all super interested in this. If you joined a call today and you're still listening to me, that means you care about AI, right? There are other users that these sorts of things are not on their radar in any way, shape, or form. So helping them understand kind of at a very basic level why they would use these things, training them on the basics, what they need to be concerned about from a copyright standpoint, from if you're concerned about privacy, things like that. It's very important, right? To inform them, beyond just here's this thing, right? Because in a lot of cases, you are going to receive responses that may or may not be accurate, right? So we want to train users on how to use these things responsibly and ethically, and then encourage knowledge sharing. How are your folks using this? For the people who are early adopters, they can really get other folks excited about it today. You can do all of these things just with Bing Chat Enterprise, without bringing anybody else or anything else on board in your environments. And again, if you have Entra Identity, so Azure Active, formerly Azure Active Directory, So if you have those identities in your environment, you have access to Bing Chat's Enterprise or Vanilla Copilot, as I have been given to to call it, because I'm not sure how else to differentiate it. And lastly, I talk to our sales folks about this frequently, and to our other clients that we talk to as well. There's nothing new about what's required to prepare for Copilot, like nothing. Everything that we would recommend as Insight would recommend as an organization who's advising you is all stuff that is already tied to Microsoft 365 best practices. So all of the things that we've already talked, that you've been talking forever about, like what do I do with my SharePoint sprawl, and what governance policies do I have, and are people using OneDrive in the right way, and do we have the correct DLP set up? Do we have the pieces in place that are going to allow folks to easily adopt modern adoption? So a modern approach to adoption, that's what the Microsoft adoption framework is, because it's not going to be enough anymore to just bring people into a classroom, right, and say, okay, now let's learn about Copilot, because I'll tell you what, we've had this for about 8 weeks. There's been so many updates. It's like on a weekly basis, there are many updates, right? It changes constantly. So if you are relying on the old way of adoption, which is to get everybody in a classroom, it is not going to be enough. Perhaps that's a good way to kick something off, but you really have to have the right pieces in place to make sure that you're getting ongoing return on investment. So again, everything that we would recommend for Microsoft 365 best practices are also tied to Copilot. If this is the time when your technical debt is coming due, right? This is the time, all the things that you've been thinking about with your data estate, and this is even beyond Microsoft 365. This also is for anything else that you're looking to do with generative AI. Now is the time to do it. And now is the time to do it and undertake these projects while these technologies evolve, right? So you're ready when you're ready. So, yeah, and I think Joe is going to take us through then how we can help you do that, right? You're not alone. You got folks like us. And I think one of the best things that we can do is kind of give you a very realistic view of what you need to do to be successful. So, Joe.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to take you through is how we've been talking to customers about ultimately what everything Anna just mentioned to you on the preparing. It's our approach, right, on how we can help customers prepare. And we like to always start out with what we call a readiness workshop. And the readiness workshop is just high level, touching on what you see here. So we at Insight call what the slide you're seeing, we call it the subway map, because ultimately it gives you multiple subway paths that you could take ultimately of what you need to do to get to your end game or get to your stop, shall we say. So there's three things I think Anna touched on. First is data estate readiness. It's data migration. It's trying to understand what data is in the cloud, what data should get migrated to the cloud, similar to what, like she said, that we talked about that Box example. Should it stay in Box? Should it be migrated? And this is where we can help you understand from a cost perspective, usage perspective, because there's a lot of capabilities within the Microsoft Cloud. If you look at the E5 SKU of wrapping conditional access, compliance, rights protection, all that around your data, there's a lot that can be done when it's an ecosystem, but let's be honest, there are going to be reasons and use cases out there that people may want to keep things where they are. So the options are there. Next is a semantic index optimization, understanding what should be indexed, how it should be indexed. You may get into the areas of compliance, whether it's regionally, if you think of GDPR, there are certain things. If you think of confidentiality, there may be sites or information you may not want indexed. Absolutely all configurable, and this is where to help you better understand. Topics and SharePoint Premium. Anna and I absolutely love Topics. So it used to be called Viva Topics. And Topics is the previous version, shall we say, of AI, or shall I say, the semantic index around AI is what I like to say to it, because it goes through your entire environment topics and it kind of looks for keywords, how often they're used, who's using them, where are they located, are they in chats, are they in SharePoint documents, are people searching for it, are people talking about it? And then it creates multiple topics based on your environment. And then you can go in and actually curate those topics, like confirm the data, add additional data, maybe pin specific people to that data because maybe you want them to be the subject matter experts. Because as time goes on, topics is going to be one of the prioritizations of where Copilot gets its information from. Because ideally it's curated, it's clean data. It's almost like that trusted source. Because you don't want, at the end of the day, let's be honest, you don't want to type in Copilot a question and it's going to go search email and pull out maybe an email conversation that you had, or maybe a chat conversation two people had, just having a coffee chat. And problem with that is that may not be that trusted source. That may just be a comment someone made. It may be someone else. So this is where the things like your semantic indexing, the SharePoint Permian topics come in, because it's helping you drive that direction of providing trusted data to these tool sets and to the environment for end users to get the most out of it. Now, if we look at the second line, data governance and security. So this is where Anna kind of commented on the shared links, and it's amazing. And we talk every day to customers. And when you actually bring up to customers about OneDrive sharing to an organization versus sharing to a person, and they actually take the time to look into it, the feedback that they come back with is, oh, like it's almost like jaw dropping, because they don't realize like everybody's sharing to the organization. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, unfortunately, we're human beings. A lot of times we'd like to take the easy way out. And this is where we have the ability to help you dig into what is being shared, because you may not realize things aren't just getting shared most times to the organization. Things are getting shared anonymously or publicly, links. And so those are things just to give you some visibility to and help you clean up. And then lastly is the M365 security in that middle subway line. Is what is, do you have Defender installed? Do you need rights management for confidential data? Because, we may want the confidential data into Copilot, but we may only want certain people to have access to it. And this is where rights management, information protection, and those capabilities come in with Purview. And then the bottom one is adoption. I think we feel it's huge for this purpose. It's use case development. I'll be honest, I say it all the time. I don't see a company licensing everybody in the organization. Let's just say how it is, right? The cost of this is probably the cost you're paying for the rest of the Microsoft Cloud. So it's not cheap. So you have to get the most value out of what you're going to pay. And that's where the use case, who are the right people to use it? Like Anna commented earlier, and I think it's one of the better use cases today, is project managers. Like if you're dealing with a project within an organization or from a customer facing, being able to focus on the call while Copilot is taking notes, taking tasks, who needs to do what are follow-up items. It's a huge savings in that front, because now the person who's that project manager can spend way more time talking to the customer. So use case development, adoption services. The biggest thing, and I think Anna touched on, is that prompt engineering. It's no longer typing a few words like we know from a Bing or Google search. That's not going to be the case at this point, right? With Copilot, you're going to have to type in your 1 or 2 or 3 sentences of what data you want to get, where do you possibly want to get it, how do you want it to present it to you to give you the more accurate results you're looking for. Don't get me wrong, as time goes on, Copilot's going to get better on those prompts, and yeah, I'm sure it will shrink down. But as of today, it's very specific on how you ask it. And as you continue through a Copilot conversation, there's times where you might have to get more and more specific to that ask as you're going through the answers and the responses. So adoption service on how to use it, why to use it, where to get the benefit from. But then also some of those adoption services, if you look up as we follow that path and all the way to the fuchsia color, is to constantly keep moving this forward, right? Don't get sucked into the technical debt of an environment to where you're not going to be able to keep up. Because Anna commented, we've been in this 8 or so weeks. We were in the early access preview. It's changing on a daily, weekly basis, and we live it. So Anna, we're living this technology and seeing the change. So if as an organization, you have to stay involved, because the more you don't, then it's going to be harder to catch back up and keep up. And this is where we can help from an insight perspective. We're living this for this purpose to be able to provide you the value and the ease of possibly adopting it and implementing it in an organization. Now, we do also offer a workshop. So the workshop is a $5,000 investment. And the whole purpose of the workshop is to give you visibility of the art of the possible with Copilot. Now, we presented on Copilot. We talked about it here in this PowerPoint presentation in this webinar. But there is us getting in front of you, kind of talking through some use cases, talking through some understanding, maybe some price points, kind of showing you what Copilot can do just from our own experiences and what we have access to today. and kind of give you an understanding of what are those next steps to move forward. So we do. I mean, we like to start with the workshop first and then go into that readiness assessment, because the workshop's only a few hours. It's about a day's effort, but ultimately it's giving you visibility of, is it the right thing for me? Because you may find, if you remember that first slide where we talked about ChatGPT, Bing Chat, OpenAI, and Microsoft 365, it may be OpenAI. Azure OpenAI is the right path for what you specifically want to do. It may not be Copilot. But if it is Copilot, then we can absolutely help you figure out what's that next step and direction and how to move forward. Now, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining. Ms. Donnelly, thank you. I think I love doing webinars with you. It seems very frequent recently. But again, if you want to scan the QR code and just have a strategy session, a conversation, and if you want to possibly talk to Anna or myself about this and how you can move forward as an organization, scan the QR code, right? Put in your information, gladly reach out to your Insight salesperson too at the same time. We're here. We're here to help. We love these technologies. Like I said, we are living these technologies on a minute-by-minute basis, keeping up, having conversation with Microsoft on where it's going, understanding where the potentially, right, where the gaps are today, where they're going to be filled tomorrow. So absolutely we love having the conversation. Let us help you. Let us at least provide you some visibility on what's the value of the product in your organization and how you can ultimately, what will benefit you to actually move forward. Because keep in mind, that initial investment is $109,000 for the first year for 300 people. So it's not cheap. So I think most people are going to want to understand where do they get the ROI out of that investment. And you want to get the ROI as fast as possible. So again, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you again, Anna. And I hope everybody has a great day and hope this was informational.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.